Hey everyone, Carl Larson here, and in this lesson we're going to do a practical demonstration of applying the techniques that we learned in the previous video about audio compression to a master of your mix. So here's what's going on. We're going to simulate a church service. We're going to take a recording of a service, play it out of my computer into the switcher, and then we're going to apply some mastering dynamics processing to that signal as if it were a live service. So we're gonna have the ability to pause, stop, think about what we're doing, and then hopefully come up with some settings that take a service that has a lot of dynamics in it, where songs are really loud, speaking is really quiet, and make it a really consistent feed. So that's exactly what we've got going on. We're not gonna change anything about how we mix in the room. We're just gonna take that signal into the live stream, modify it in the switcher, and you can do the same thing on a standalone audio board, or even on a dedicated output on an audio board. But we're gonna use the mixing tools that are right inside the Blackmagic ATEM, because that's a really common setup that most churches have. And we're gonna take a signal that's kind of inconsistent in volume and turn it into something that has a very consistent level. Let's jump into Premiere first, because that's where I'm gonna be playing the service out of. And just looking at the waveform, we can see, yeah, there's music, there's preaching, and there's probably a song here at the end. So these are my friends in Grace Church in Salida, Colorado, and we're going to use their real service, not some made up thing, but a real service, and try to get this to be more consistent audio. So I'm gonna stop and start and kind of be jumping in between playback and the ATEM software, but it's just because I don't have a live service going on. So I'll be popping the headphones on and off as well, so I can listen and it doesn't affect the recording on the mic here. So let's jump right into the ATEM software and kind of see what our options are. So as we saw in the previous lesson, we're gonna achieve a lot of our dynamics processing using a compressor. It's gonna take those loud parts, make them quieter, and allow us to turn up the quiet parts so that the difference between the loud stuff and the quiet stuff isn't as extreme. We're gonna turn down the dynamic range of the audio so that our overall perceived loudness is greater. So to do that, let's go into the audio mixer here, and you can see I already have a compressor applied from our last lesson, and this should be relatively close, but I could just reset this whole thing and come in and we can just start with kind of a blank slate. So let's turn on the compressor and see how it goes. So I'm gonna start up the audio, and let's start in a musical part. And so in Premiere, you can see the unaffected signal is minus 12 dB, and you can see that coming in here as well in the ATEM software. And what we wanna be doing is applying some gain reduction and then the makeup gain. So let's actually full reset this compressor here and start over. So I'm gonna turn on the compressor just as its default levels. I'm not even listening to the signal yet. We will listen to the signal, but I can just look at the meter and go, okay, there's a lot of gain reduction happening. It's pretty consistent, and the output is being turned down from the input. So what do I wanna see happen? I wanna see the loud parts turned down. Do I want everything turned down? Probably not. So let's maybe bring that threshold up a little bit and turn the ratio down. So we're gonna say less parts of the signal are loud, but when they are loud, we're really gonna turn them down. Now, let's take a listen on the headphones and see what this sounds like. All right, so we're in the beginning of a song, which is good. And that gain reduction is pretty aggressive. I might actually turn the threshold down a little bit and not quite have a ratio of 4 is a little bit strong. Overall, the idea is that we're gonna take the input of the Mac, and we're gonna adjust it here on the individual channel, and then we're gonna send that channel to the master output of the ATEM mixer, and we're gonna stack compressors. So we're gonna have a fairly mild compression on the input, and then a fairly aggressive compression on the final output, so that we can compress it and get everything kind of into those places, but we're not doing it so aggressively all in one step. We're gonna do it kind of mildly, then aggressively. So this is our mild compressor on the Mac. All right, so we got another song coming up, and at this point I'm gonna take this and just turn everything up. Let's add some output, maybe 13 decibels, it looks like. And that makes sense. So since I'm getting a gain reduction of like minus 10, somewhere in there, I'm probably able to add in 13 decibels of gain without having anything clip. So the violin sounds good, nothing sounds muffled yet, and now the singers are gonna start, we'll see how that sounds. In Christ alone, my hope is found. He is my light, my strength. Cool. All right, so what we're seeing is, I'm gonna mute the headphones just for a moment. So what I can see on the dynamics here is there's a little bit of gain reduction happening all the time, and then as the guitar and other things are coming in, it's kind of pumping downward. So if I turn the release up even more, it's going to stay down longer and then slowly come back up. If I get that too high, it's going to sound, we're going to hear that kind of like up, down, kind of a pumpy sound. But we want that, maybe hang on just a little bit longer. So maybe if I turn up the hold just a little bit, that's going to help us here. So I'm going to listen again on the headphones. In Christ alone, who took on flesh. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. So what else can we do? Let's mute the audio again. Now what I'm going to do is let's go to a quiet section of the service. So let's find a portion where it's not music. Let's see how this goes during some preaching. So I'm just going to choose a different section of the service, hit play, and switch on over again. Let's listen.
Prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my
kingdom, they're reading scripture,
fear and reverence the God of Daniel.
There's not a lot of gain reduction happening,
God, and he endures forever.
But there is some, and that's what we want. We want to have it grabbing all kind of parts and pushing things down. So I might be able to add a little bit more makeup gain here, but again, what we don't want to do is we don't want to smush the music too much and bring up. So we got to kind of find a balance in between the music and the preaching.
Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus.
So that sounds pretty good. Now that we've applied all this compression, let's look at expansion. What's an expander? An expander is kind of the opposite of a compressor. A compressor says we have an incoming signal, and once it gets above a certain threshold, we start turning that signal down. An expander, on the other hand, is going to work exactly the opposite. It says, once I hit a certain threshold of quietness, I'm going to turn the signal down. So what can happen overall is if we start compressing the signal and then adding a bunch of makeup gain, we can start really turning up those quiet parts. And in those quiet parts is going to be some potential hissy or low rumble that we don't necessarily want in the signal. So we can use an expander to say, let's take those quiet parts. Once I define what's quiet, we can just turn those quiet parts down slowly. So we don't want to have a gate necessarily, so there's two options here. We can have an expander or a gate. An expander is going to say, once it gets quiet, I'm going to start turning it down even more and just kind of close the door on the signal a little bit. I'm going to make it quieter. I'm going to expand that out. So that's the first thing that we see here is the range is how much am I going to reduce that? So the nice thing with an expander is I can say, how much of that signal do I want to get rid of? I don't need to get rid of all of it, which is nice. The default here is 18, and I think it's a great place to start. So it's just going to say, if it's really quiet, I'm just going to shut that down. The threshold is exactly just like a compressor, except it's working in the opposite direction. So how quiet does the signal have to be before it starts turning it down, increasing the dynamic range? Well, I don't know. We gotta play with the signal and listen to some quiet parts to hear that. So I'm going to start the sermon up again.
That God uses Cyrus.
So you see in those quiet parts, it closes it. So we want a fast attack so it can open up. Anything that happens here, we want to make sure that we're not closing off words. So as soon as a word is spoken, as soon as it gets above that threshold, we want the expander or the gate to open up. We don't want that muting to happen, but we want it to release slowly. We don't want it to boom, be open, boom, be closed. So I think the biggest adjustment we can make here is turn up that release so that we don't see that gain reduction for the gate go all the way down really, really fast. Instead, we want to see that slowly close off. So let's turn up the time on the release.
God has plans to work in Salida. God has plans to work in your family. God has plans
keep turning that
to
up.
Work in your workplace. God has plans to work there, and he wants to use you if he can.
Yeah, see how that's closing nice and slowly now?
If.
So it's a lot less perceivable, and it's not going to cut off any words that just get right below that threshold. It's going to slowly close that off.
Customs.
So that feels like, looking at the signal here, I'm getting a nice kind of compression going on there, and the expander is working well. The other thing that we didn't touch in the expander is the ratio. The ratio, again, is going to work just like a compressor. It's saying how much of a slope I'm going to add to, how fast am I going to turn that signal down once it gets below it. So is it the easiest way is just to plain show it. So if I turn up the ratio, you see how the line gets steeper. It's not just reducing the level of the audio, it's reducing it at a faster rate. So you can really see that gain being reduced and that first meter. The other thing that we see on the expander is that it's just kind of flapping open a little bit. We don't always want to be doing that. So if we turn up the hold says it has to be below that threshold long enough before it goes into act. So we should be, as we listen here now, we shouldn't see so much fluttering on the expander.
Or Jesus comes and takes us home. You haven't endured, you haven't kept on, you haven't finished until you've shed your blood or Jesus comes and gets you.
There we are. That sounds like it's a good, that expander is set up well to close off kind of the hissing quiet points, but we're not going full mute. We're just closing it as we need. And then the makeup gain and the compressor is really turning up to try to make everything as consistent as possible. So that sounds good to me at this point. I'm going to go and let's try another section. Let's do some music and see, are our settings too aggressive? And hopefully they're not. And if they are, we can just back them off a little bit. So we're later on in the service, we're at a closing song and we'll press play here and see what happens. So play. So it is reducing the gain pretty significantly, but we still see it pumping a little bit, which is good. If that was always grabbing it, I'd say our threshold is too low, but I don't think this is too much right now. So you can still see our output level is not super loud, and that's what we're gonna do with multi-stage compression now. So what we're gonna do is let's add another compressor to the output of this compressor. So our Mac input is being compressed, it has the expander and the makeup gain, and now we're gonna feed the output of that signal into the master. So if I go to the master and I turn on dynamics, I can have another dynamics processor in line. And let's see what we can do here. So if I add another compressor, it's gonna be pretty aggressive. This is my cleanup compressor. I want this compressor to just take off the last little bit of that loud signal if we need it. So I'm going to turn up the threshold higher and make sure that my ratio is a little more stiff. So now I can take the output of that first compressor, it's being applied, and I can take all that and turn it up. And now you can see, as I listen to music.
All the wives said, amen. My future is incredibly bright. Anybody can get in on this.
All right, I'm going to pause that and we're going to back up again in the music and try it again here. So we're going to play the music.
My side,
and now that we've got the two stacked compressors, you can see that our input on the very left is -20, but our output is -5. It's really consistent. That's great. So we're just using this to kind of push everything together. The one last step is we can turn on a limiter. A limiter is simply a compressor that has a very, very high ratio, like 1:50. And that limiter is gonna have, it's again set by a threshold, and we can say, you know what, no matter how loud it is, if it gets above this level, don't let it through. And that can be kind of the final cleanup on our signal. So I'm gonna turn the headphones on and listen again. And you can see how we're just kind of rounding off the top of that graph. We're going from -20 on the input to pretty consistently in between that -5 to 0, just like we're hoping to have. And again, what I like about this setup, the reason it makes me feel good, is the gain reduction isn't kicking in all the time. It's just cleaning up kind of the signal that we set up on the main input and pushing everything into place. That's what we want to see. So let's find another section. The music is getting louder, so this is good.
To this I hold, my sin has been defeated.
So the threshold for the, maybe I can bring that down just a little bit so that that limiter is actually doing something. So that should be pretty consistent now. So I'm adding almost 14 decibels on one end of the chain and another 11. So everything is going to be living in there. Let's go back to Premiere and back it up to the preaching in the middle of the service, see how that sounds.
Ink, no eraser. So King Darius put the
So -5 or so.
Verse 10.
So this is great. We've
Now,
got the
when
gate
Daniel
working,
learned
the expander working as a
that he had
gate,
been published,
and then we're
he went
applying
home
all
to
the
his
extra
upstairs
steps here
room,
so that
where the
output
windows
is really,
opened
really
toward
consistent.
Jerusalem. 3 times a day.
I'm gonna stop. Let me grab just another part of the music here. And again, this looks really good. So the main compressor is doing most of the work, and then the second compressor on the main output is doing just a little cleanup. This is how we make even levels for a live stream, and really for any channel on your audio board. These same ideas can be applied to your preacher's mic input or anything else. So in review, we can make our levels consistent by applying compressors, expanders, and limiters. And when we use them in a successive chain, when we stack one on top of the other, we can get really consistent results. I hope this lesson, although it's a little bit different, I hope this lesson really kind of helped you see visually what's going on, how to set it up. And now from Sunday to Sunday, regular services can just continue, and at least everything is going to be nice and easy to hear. And that's more than half the battle. Thanks for watching.